Okay, this is the test corrections for Unit 7. I regret I did not make these corrections in person due to my illness, but I am recording 2 videos on how to correct this test. So let's start with the first question. The first question required one to do the complete factorization of this. So the complete factorization, you will notice that your numerator is going to have x and x. You know that one of them is going to be positive and one of them is going to be negative. The reason you know this is because your constant term, -6, is negative. And the only way you have factors that result in a negative number is a negative times a positive. So we are looking for the factors of 6 that have a difference of 1. And that, of course, is +3 and -2. Now, the denominator, you notice that both 3x squared and -12 are both divisible by 3. So the first thing you're going to do is to factor out 3, and that gives you x squared minus 4. Now, that is not a complete factorization. Your complete factorization would have the numerator and the denominator. The denominator will still feature the 3. However, x squared minus 4 is a difference of squares. 4 is 2 squared, and so that actually breaks down into x plus 2 times x minus 2. Now your equation of your vertical asymptote, we'll get to that in just a moment, these x minus 2's cancel, meaning that you have a removable discontinuity, which answers the C question. And so the equation of the vertical asymptote is where x is equal to -2. That would be if I plug in a -2 here, this becomes 0, and the whole denominator becomes 0. Your vertical asymptote is where your denominator becomes 0. Your removable discontinuity exists at +2. Because that would make this x minus 2 equal to 0, because 2 minus 2 is 0. Okay, so that was it for the first one. Number 2, for which rational function is the domain equal to all real numbers and the range greater than 0.25? Now, you could have graphed these, and that would have been intelligent. But the other thing you need to recognize is what you can eliminate. For choice A, you have a vertical asymptote where x is equal to 0. So that eliminates A. In like manner, for choice D, you have a vertical asymptote where x is equal to 1. So that eliminates D, because for these two, the domain is not all real numbers. Now, the issue then becomes the domain has to be greater than 0.25. Or rather, the range has to be greater than 0.25. Now, all things kept aside, we can graph these, or you notice that as this approaches 0, we are left with 1/4, and as this approaches infinity, we are left with 1/4. Now let's just graph B just to visualize it. So we have 2x squared plus 1 divided by x squared plus 4. Here it dips until you get to 0.4, and then it goes above. And we can actually see this at the table. Now, let's compare that to choice C, where we have 5 over x squared plus 6 minus 2. Now, when we graph that, you see that it's clearly less than 1/4. It's actually much, much lower. And so it fails the range test. The other thing you will notice is that, so we know it's not C, is that this part has a horizontal asymptote of -2. Because the degree of the denominator is greater than the degree of the numerator, and then you have the -2 translation down. So that's why this one doesn't work, and B is the correct response. Now, number 3, relatively simple. You have the rational parent function. That's the function y is equal to 1 over x, and then you have changed it to then y is equal to 1 over x plus 8, and you recognize that insiders lie, and so we realize that it is shifted to the left 8 units. That's just, hi, do you remember that insiders lie? Everyone should have gotten that one. Number 4 was an open response. It says if x is -2, then the table says you have an error. Well, that tells you that your function, you have y is equal to 4 over x. Now the question is, what and -2 would give you 0? Because you get the error when you divide by 0. Well, it's -2 plus 2 would get you to 0, so that tells you that this is x plus 2. Also, we remember that if you're inside the denominator, you lie. Now, she also notices that as the x value approaches -infinity, the y value seems to approach 3, and she notices that the y value approaches positive infinity, the y value seems to approach -3. Well, in this case, the degree of the numerator is less than the degree of the denominator. That means the horizontal asymptote should be 0, except you have a -3 translation. And that is how you get that one. Okay, so the next one, you have a stopper placed in the bathtub. And so it takes 16 minutes to fill, and it takes 20 minutes to empty. And it's the same amount of time, and that's our x. And they're being subtracted from one another, and there's only one tub. And so that's how you set it up. And so you find the common multiple of 16 and 20. Well, in this case, the common multiple of 16 and 20 is 80. 80, of course, is 16 times 5 and 20 times 4. So 80 divided by 16 gives you 5, which you multiply by the x. 80 divided by 20 is 4, which you multiply by the x, is equal to 80. And then, of course, 5x minus 4x is equal to 80. Combine your like terms, and you find that your time x is equal to 80 minutes. And that's it for that one. And so let's take a look at the second page before bringing this video to a stop. Okay, the cost per person to rent a chartered bus varies inversely. Inversely means your formula is y is equal to k over x. And so 40 people, the cost per person is y, and the number of people is x. So 40 people is your x1. And 950 is your y1, and 25 is your x2. So, you remember that y is equal to kx, so that means y1 is equal to k over x1, which means y1 was 950, is equal to k, which is our unknown at this point, times 40. You multiply both sides by 40 to find k, which in this case I'm going to use a calculator. And you have 380. So k is equal to 380. And then you do the same thing again, only this time you say that y2 is equal to k, which is 380, divided by x2. In this case, you have that x2 is equal to 25. So you plug that in, and then it's just a matter of division. So you divide 380 by 25, and that gives you 15.2. y2 is equal to $15.20. The last one, which of the following would be a graph of an inverse relationship? A is linear, B is the inverse function, C is an exponential, and D is a quadratic. So this is very simply, do you remember what is the diagram of each. We will continue with the next 2 pages in the next video.